Haven, spelled as Haven. Haven. Part of speech is noun. This word has two meanings. First one, a place of safety or refuge. The second one, a harbour or small port. The origin of the word dates back to the pre-12th century. The original Old Norse meaning applied to a harbour or small port where boats would be safe, hence the second meaning. This feeling of security meant that haven was used to describe any sort of safe place or sanctuary. Now let's look at some examples on how to use the word in sentences. The riverbanks are a haven for the animals. The island offers a haven to the ships. Here are some synonyms of the term: refuge, harbour, port, shelter, etc.
Fatuous. 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 The part of speech is adjective. It means silly and pointless. Dating back to the early 17th century, the origin can be traced back to the Latin word fatus, meaning foolish. You might recognize this root in the word infatuation, a silly, foolish crush. Some ways to use the word fatuous in sentences are as follows. The commander was left speechless by this fatuous comment. He thought of his wife's obsession with birds as fatuous. And here are some synonyms: silly, foolish, childish, etc. Filial. F-I-L-I-A-L. Filial. Part of speech, adjective. This word has two meanings. First one being relating to or due from a son or daughter. The second meaning is more or less the same as the first definition that we just read, denoting the generation or generations after the parental generation. The word originated in the mid-14th century. Filial developed in Middle English from Old French, but originally came from the Latin words filialis, filius meaning son, and filia meaning daughter. Now let's look at some examples of the word being used in sentences to understand the word a little bit better. His father would accuse him of neglecting his filial duties. Amy's filial duties included driving her parents to the church every week. And lastly, here are some synonyms: dutiful, compliant, faithful, respectful, etc. Gonzo. G-O-N-Z or Z-O. Gonzo. Part of speech, adjective. Some of you might recognize this term as the name of the popular Muppet character Gonzo the Great or the Great Gonzo. But what does Gonzo mean? It means bizarre or crazy. A term in journalism used to define a particular writing style used by some journalists. Gonzo is an Italian term that became a part of the English language in the 1970s. In Spanish, gonzo means goose or fool. In Italian, gonzo means foolish. There might be some outrageous activities described, but gonzo was adopted into English to describe the wild, literary stylized journalism popularized in the 1970s. Now let's look at some examples of the term being used in some sentences. He is a journalist known for his gonzo writings. Some people believe that Van Gogh's paintings were gonzo. And lastly, here are some synonyms: bizarre, eccentric, etc.
Roister. R-O-I-S-T-E-R. Roister. Part of speech, verb. Roister means to enjoy oneself or celebrate in a noisy or boisterous way. Do not confuse roister with boister. They sound similar and have similar meanings but are two different words. Roister is a Latin term that is believed to have become part of the English language dictionary in the late 16th century. Roister has a diverse background, including its bout in France as ruster or ruffian, but it predominantly originates from the Latin word rusticus or rustic. Now let's look at some examples of the word being used in some sentences. I miss roistering in music festivals. New Year's Eve in Times Square is the most roisterous event one can attend. And lastly, here are some synonyms: celebrate, party, boisterous, etc.
Gruntled. G-R-U-N-T-L-E-D. Gruntled. Part of speech, adjective. Gruntled means to be pleased, satisfied, and contented. Gruntled is the antonym of disgruntled. The term gruntled originated in the 1930s. It is thought that gruntle developed from a 1930s back formation, when a word is formed from an existing word, of the word disgruntled, which means to be angry or dissatisfied. To understand the term better, let's look at some examples of the term being used in some sentences. He was certainly a long way from being gruntled. After a warm cup of tea, Mrs. Thompson was visibly gruntled. And lastly, here are some synonyms: satisfied, pleased, elated, delighted, etc. Profound. P-R-O-F-O-U-N-D. Profound. Part of speech, adjective. Profound has two meanings. First, very great or intense emotions. For instance, you might have that one toy or thing you may have a sentimental connection with. You have intense emotions for this thing and can't seem to get rid of it. It means you have profound feelings for it. The second meaning is when a person has or shows great knowledge or interest, or is insightful about something, like how most of our history teachers come across as. They seem to have great knowledge about the subject and are quite insightful about it. If you are an avid book reader, you might already know this term. The term profound is believed to have become a part of the English language dictionary in the 14th century. Profundus literally means deep in Latin, and profound had the same meaning when it entered English in the 14th century. But even then, it also meant figuratively deep, that is, very great or intense. To understand the term a little better, let's look at some examples of the term being used in some sentences. His knowledge of Greek mythology is profound. The news of her demise came as a profound shock to everyone. And lastly, here are some synonyms: intense, deep, thoughtful, etc.
Disport. D-I-S-P-O-R-T. Disport. Part of speech, work. Disport means to enjoy oneself unrestrainedly. If you just get too excited and get carried away with yourself, that's a perfect depiction of the verb disport. Disport is an old French term that is believed to have become part of the English language dictionary in the 14th century. The Middle English term disport comes from the Old French word disporter, with the literal translation being carried away. Geoffrey Chaucer was one of the first writers to amuse the reading public with the verb disport. In order to understand the word a little better, let's look at some examples of the term being used in some sentences. The children disported themselves at the beach. The pamphlet read, "It is a full-service resort where vacationers may disport at a variety of indoor and outdoor activities." And lastly, here are some synonyms: amuse, frolic, rollick, run around, etc. Placate. 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 Part of speech, verb. Placate means to please someone or make them comfortable and or less angry. When you do something in order to please them or make them comfortable, like giving your crush an extra candy on your birthday, or maybe you do it to make them less angry, like paying for your boss's taxi fare, you do it in order to placate the person. Even the word please itself is a distant relative of the word placate. Placate is a Latin term that is believed to have become part of the English language dictionary in the 17th century. The word is derived from Latin term placatus, the past participle of placare, and even after more than 300 years in English, it still carries the basic meaning of its Latin ancestor, which means to soothe or to appease. In order to understand the word placate a little better, let's look at some examples of the term being used